are currently working on a bill to make changes to U.S. intelligence operations as recommended by the 9/11 Commission. Today, some family members of those killed on 9/11 talked about the progress of the intelligence legislation. This is about a half hour.
Good morning, and thank you for coming today. My name is Carrie Lamack. This is Carol Ashley, Mary Fetchett, Congressman Tim Romer, and Abe, I don't know your last name.
Scott.
Abraham Scott. We are all family members of victims of September 11th, 2001. And we're here today to talk about where we stand now, 3 years later, on the verge of losing a bill that's necessary to prevent further attacks from taking place. But our journey did not begin today, nor did it begin with the release of the Commissioned report. Instead, it began on a clear, crisp day when the world watched as our loved ones were brutally murdered. We believed our president would move, quote, heaven and earth to stop another attack from happening. Yet he adamantly resisted the easiest thing one could do to stop the terrorists, find out how they were successful in the first place. It took us 14 months to drag this president and his administration, kicking and screaming, to the Oval Office to sign into law the National Commission of Terrorist Attacks upon the United States. But the journey was not done there. We had to fight for adequate funding for the Commission, for timely security clearances for the Commission and its staffers, for an extension when the heel-dragging of multiple government agencies bled the Commission of much-needed time. And now we stand 3 months after the Commission had released its final report. There is no question where the Commission stands. They have endorsed the Senate bill. There is no question where the families stand. We have endorsed the same Senate bill. And until this weekend, when General Myers went against them, there was no question where the White House stood. They supported a strong NID, just like the Commission. These politicians today are telling us, however, that there can be no deal. There will be no bill. This is just not true. If they wanted to, the White House and Speaker Hastert could decide to agree with the Senate and get a bill done and get a bill on the President's desk before Election Day. They have to agree with the bipartisan Senate conferees, the House Democrats, and get it done now. And Speaker Hastert, President Bush, we ask you to make it so now. Tomorrow is my mom's birthday. She should turn 54 tomorrow. But there's no grave for my family to visit. We didn't get any of her remains to bury. She disappeared that clear, crisp September day. Do not let this bill, do not let this 9/11 Commission recommendations suffer her fate. Do not let it disappear. This bill can be passed. It can be done, and our country can be made safer. How can Speaker Hastert or President Bush or anyone else not let it be? Now I'm going to introduce Mary Fetchett. Her son Brad was in the South Tower of the World Trade Center.
Hello, my name is Mary Fetchett, and I lost my 24-year-old son, Brad, on September 11th. As Carrie mentioned, our families have had many hurdles over the past 3 years. We fought for 14 months for the establishment of a commission, fought for an extension of time, fought for an allocation of money, fought for documents, fought for individuals to testify, and for a substantive strategic plan to correct our dysfunctional government. We look back and recognize our accomplishments. Over the past year, I've witnessed firsthand that a small group of individuals who feel passionate about the safety of our country can make a difference. That we are fortunate to live in a country where we do have a voice, and as Americans, we can and should participate in the political process. I have had the honor to work with individuals, the family members standing behind us, the commissioners, and in our government who have worked for the greater good. Senator Collins, Senator Lieberman, Senator Graham, Congressman Shays, and Maloney, to mention a few. And, of course, the 9/11 commissioners, Tim Romer is here today, worked in a bipartisan manner to produce a long overdue strategic plan to overhaul our intelligence apparatus. However, as someone who has been thrust into the political system and new to politics, I was dismayed at my assumption that our elected officials collectively are working in our best interest to correct what was wrong. Over 3 months ago, the 9/11 report was issued, and I was naive enough to believe that the same administration and Congress that failed to protect my son and nearly 3,000 others on September 11th would put party politics aside and embrace the 9/11 recommendations. Sadly, I was mistaken. I was naive enough to believe that our job, the 9/11 Family Steering Committee, was over. I was informed that our job had just begun, that our families put a face on the tragedy, and that we are the conscience for our government and our elected officials, a conscience that they needed to enact legislation and implement needed reforms. I was shocked. I was told that it is election year, that the recommendations would be politicized, that the administration would do what was politically right, and that real reform would require pressure from our families on the administration. I was told that change doesn't happen easily in Washington, that power is money, that the Department of Defense would attempt to maintain their control and would do what they can to minimize the role of the National Intelligence Director. I was appalled. Sadly, they were right. We were fearful if similar bills weren't passed in the House and Senate that they would have difficulty coming to consensus. We were right. We had concerns that extraneous provisions in the House bill would delay reforms and distract the negotiations from focusing on the core recommendations of the 9/11 Commission, the National Intelligence Director, the National Counterterrorism Center, and the Civil Liberties Board. Despite Speaker of the House Hastard's promise, we were right. It has delayed the process. Despite our continued vulnerabilities, the American public has been misled and misinformed that our country is safer. Facts have been manipulated, the truth has been spun, and real legislation that would make our families safer has become a political football. On September 11th, my son Brad, Carrie's 50-year-old mother Judy, Abe's 46-year-old wife Janice, and Carol's 23-year-old daughter Jan were murdered. They died a horrific death. Our government failed to protect our loved ones, and yet no one to date has been held accountable. Individuals who had made strategic errors despite available information continue to have roadblocks lay in front of these recommendations. Our families want real reform and support the 9/11 Commission recommendations and the Senate version of the legislation that ensures a strong NID, NCTC, and Civil Liberties Board. We want legislation on the desk of the President before the election. We think it can happen. We are not willing to allow the administration, the Department of Defense, or individuals who are their messengers to stand in the way of making our country safer. We are not willing to accept the status quo or an outdated system that was created 50 years ago. We are not willing to accept a whittled-down version of the 9/11 recommendations or allow power-driven individuals to railroad real reform behind the scenes. As a nation, we cannot let this opportunity for a long overdue restructuring of our government to pass by. There is a sense of urgency. As a mother, I lost a wonderful son in an event that could have and should have been prevented. I cannot stick my head in the sand. I know that unless the 9/11 recommendations are implemented, my family, your family, and all Americans' lives are at risk. We will continue to fight for reforms. I pray that the individuals who have worked so hard to identify and correct the problems that plague our government have the same courage our loved ones had on September 11th as they faced the reality of a horrific death. I encourage the conferees to remain in Washington to continue their work in the best interest of the country. I ask the President, the Secretary of Defense, the Speaker of the House, and Mr. DeLay to support the legislation and refrain from railroading the process to make our country safer. History will judge their actions, and we, the families, and the American people will hold them personally accountable when tragically other families face a similar loss in the next attack. I was very dismayed today to read, as I mentioned, the Department of Defense, when you have General Myers come out publicly and try to railroad this process, and then to see the headlines in the paper today, delays on 9/11 bill are laid to the Pentagon. This is unacceptable. We have to move forward. We have to have a strong NID. We have to have a system in place that is going to protect the 294 million Americans in our country. Thank you. And I'd like to introduce now Carol Ashley.
Hello. We came to Washington looking for an intelligence reform bill, but we have a problem. So far, there is no agreement between the House Republicans and the rest of the conferees. 16 conferees support the bipartisan Senate bill with a strong national intelligence director that was recommended by the 9/11 Commission. These 16 conferees are comprised of Senate Republicans and Senate and House Democrats. 5 House Republicans stand in opposition to a strong intelligence director with the authorities that he needs. Is America willing to continue with the same dysfunctional status quo that we had on September 11th? No one was in charge then, and no one is in charge today. This legislation is supposed to ensure that someone is in charge. Someone will be accountable. What will it take to move the President and Congress to get this done? We've already lost 3,000 people, among them my beautiful 25-year-old daughter. The 9/11 Commission identified major problems in our intelligence apparatus, and it recommended action to correct them. Our government is failing us again today by not passing this reform legislation. The President says that he supports the Senate bill. The Pentagon, in apparent contradiction to the President's position, opposes this Senate version because it gives the NID budgetary control and other authorities. But the President is our Commander-in-Chief. Shouldn't his opinion prevail? Speaker Hastert, too, told us to his face that he wants to get this legislation passed. He said that the House would not stand in the way of a final bill. But in fact, it is the House Republican conferees whose intransigence is blocking this bill. We have to ask, how will this situation change for the better between now and November 16th, when Congress comes back for a lame duck session? Who is going to convince these 5 House Republican conferees that they have an obligation to do everything possible not only to protect the warfighters, but also the 294 million Americans right here in the continental United States? Mr. President and Speaker Hastert, you have the power. We don't want hollow words. We want intelligence reform legislation that is true to the 9/11 Commission's recommendations. We challenge you, both of you, to prove your commitment by reining in the House conferees and getting this legislation done. And now I'd like to introduce Congressman Romer, or Mr. Abraham Scott.
Good morning. As I stated before, my name is Abraham Scott, and I lost my wife of 24 years in the Pentagon that September 11th morning. And as a true Christian, I believe in terms of if you believe, you can do anything, not almost anything. You can do anything if you believe. And I am challenging the conferees, along with the other Congress members, to, if they believe we can put a good bill on the President's desk, before the election. As a military man, I believe in the KISS system. That's KIS, keep it simple. And I do believe that Congress and the conferees, along with Congress, can keep this simple and move on and put a good bill on the president's desk. And I also believe that if they do not put this bill on the desk before the 2nd of November, the initiative will be lost. And I use as an example, if you remember, right after September 11th, 2001, there was a flag on every house. Congress was speaking of what needed to be done in order to make this, in order for this not to happen again. But after a few months, there were very little flags on houses. Congress began speaking little about 9/11, and we need to make this. We need to make this happen. And there were two things that was said right after 9/11, and that was number one, good things are going to come out this evil event, and I'm hoping that Congress will make sure that something good will come out this evil event in terms of putting this bill on the president's desk. The other thing, and that is, we must not let this happen again. And as Mary stated before, no one, and I repeat, no one has been punished or identified as a responsible agency or people for this act, for this particular draft, for this evil act that occurred on September 11th. And I can assure you that if something does happen again and Congress does not pass this, Congress does not put this bill on the president's desk before 2 November, someone will be held accountable. Thank you.
My name is Tim Romer. I'm on the 9/11 Commission, and I've had the unbelievable pleasure and opportunity to work with the 9/11 families for the last 3 years. On the Intelligence Committee, writing the legislation to create the 9/11 Commission, and on the 9/11 Commission. And we would not be here on the 1-yard line, close to scoring a touchdown and passing these reforms, if it was not for these families. You can see the rawness and the pain of what they still feel every single day, even though this was 3 years ago that we lost 3,000 people. We cannot let this happen again. We can't have 10,000 people sitting behind us or 20,000 people sitting behind us and feel the agony and the pain of the loss of those American families. And it is genuine, it is heartfelt that they don't want other Americans to experience this. Now is the time to act. This is the accountability and the responsibility for this administration and this Congress. If not now, when do we do it? With this election having the sunshine and the responsibility on these people to do their act and to pass these reforms. Let me just make 2 points. One, we know Al-Qaeda is coming. The enemy wants to attack America again. 2, we have some of the answers. The 9/11 Commission report, which is unanimous, without any kind of minority opinion. 41 unanimous recommendations to make this country safer and do something for these families and the rest of America. We haven't seen it happen yet. My second point is this, that just as there should be praise and kudos for the President and the Congress if they can get this done in the remaining days, there should also be responsibility and blame if they don't accomplish these reforms. And what better way to express it than on November the 2nd? We have a monumental and significant opportunity to update laws that haven't been significantly changed since 1947. And we have a new enemy ready to strike. It is Congress's and the President's responsibility to act. The Constitution says it as simply as anything in the great documents of American history. It says simply in the first paragraph to make sure that we ensure domestic tranquility and provide for the common defense. What more important set of criteria do we have before the President and Congress than these 9/11 recommendations? So I thank you for coming today, and I especially want to associate myself with these wonderful family members that have made such a great difference in trying to get this legislation passed.
Do you have any hope that it'll actually get done? I mean, given the intransigence at this point, or is this, when do you say no? Not hope, practical expectation, I mean, given the timetable?
Well, we had a press conference yesterday, the 9/11 Commission did, where we expressed our support for major provisions of the Senate bill on the NCTC, on the NID, and the power, the budget authority. And we think the time remaining, being optimistic and hopeful, is sufficient to get this done. If you gave members of Congress 48 hours notice to get back here to vote and to read the bill, and then it had the time, it had 24 hours to pass and get to the President's desk, you still have enough time between now and Friday to get this done. I talked to Jane Harman late last night, and they were the four negotiators, Senator Lieberman, Senator Collins, Congressman Hoekstra, Congresswoman Harman, were all meeting late last night. And as I talked to people this morning on the Hill, they were meeting again this morning. They're meeting as we speak.
But practically speaking, Congressman, it has to be today, by sundown tonight, doesn't it?
This President and this Congress have the responsibility to put a bill together today if it's going to make it through the legislative process and be signed before the election. I don't think anybody wants to put this into a lame duck session. Congress has been unable to pass their appropriations bills. So far, they've been unable to pass these reform measures. This could be the highlight for Congress over the last several years. It could also be one of the most gloomy and dismal days if Congress can't get their job done.
Mr. Rowan.
If I may, can I just answer that very quickly, too? We're not from Washington. We're not from the Hill. And I know that all of you understand how the Hill works, and the Congressman does. And you keep telling us it can't get done. It's very simple. Speaker Hastert, President Bush, tell the House Republicans to stop railroading, get the bill done today. It's very simple. My mom's from Boston. She's a Red Sox fan. You cannot tell Red Sox fans that things can't get done this season. So I asked Speaker Hastert and President Bush, decide today you want to do it and get it done and call Congress back and let's get it voted on. Let's get it on the President's desk immediately. Let's not let the politicians tell us we can't do it.
Can I ask you, why do you think that President Bush has not insisted that this get done? What is motivating him not to take a more active role in getting this bill completed?
Well, if I had a meeting with President Bush, I would ask him the exact same question, but he won't grant us that. So I ask you to ask him. I don't know. But like the Congressman said, what could be more important than making America safer today? Not after the election, not in a lame duck session, but today.
Mr. Romer, you're a veteran of the politics of this town. I'd like to know specifically what you think the motivations are involved that has not allowed this bill to get through to this point.
Well, we might actually be able to answer that question if this bill doesn't get done after today. I think people will be very frank about why this did not get done and where the process broke down, whether it's accountability and leadership issues of the President and the Congress. Listen, as I said before, as a Democrat, I'm absolutely willing to give the Republican President of the United States praise and credit for getting these critically important 9/11 recommendations passed, even days before one of the most important elections in our nation's history. But I'm also willing to say that if they don't get it done, if the President and the Congress cannot achieve this vital set of legislative accomplishments and goals, then there should be blame and there should be accountability on Election Day. I'm happy to talk to you more about where that process broke down, if it does in fact break down in the next 12 to 16 hours and we can't get this
But do
done.
you sense that the president really wants a bill, or do you sense that this is sort of being slow-walked, and the Myers letter is something that the House Republicans can point to and say, see, the Pentagon brass doesn't really want it? I mean, are they playing both sides of the game here?
This administration is duly respected for its discipline and its being on message. It's certainly very curious that the Joint Chiefs of Staff spoke out over the weekend undercutting the president's position and talking about a NID that was not as powerful on executive budget authority and personnel authority that the Senate and 80% of the conferees and the 9/11 Commission supports. I find that to be astounding that that would happen at a critical time in the conference. Certainly this administration has a spotty record of support for the 9/11 Commission. I fought to get this 9/11 Commission in place, as these families did. We wouldn't have it without their support. The administration was initially opposed to that commission. We're here. We've made our recommendations. That's ancient history. Now they have the opportunity to help pass this legislation. With this legislation poised, so close to being passed in a conference committee with 80% of the conferees in favor. We need, if we can't get agreement today, I would certainly hope we have a public, the second conference meeting. They've only had one. Let's see in public on this conference committee who's for it and who's against it and who's voting no. Let's see how the president has redoubled his efforts to encourage the House Republicans to make sure that they are supportive of getting to a bill before Election Day. I think those are critically important at this stage of the game.
Can I just answer that? We were at the White House a couple of weeks ago in an effort because we did receive through the media that the White House was in support of moving this bill forward. And so we scheduled a meeting in the hope that we could collaborate and work with the Commission, with the Senate version of the bill, and the White House. And we were just shocked to hear that not only did they not think the bill would go through by the end of the year, but confused by even the conversations that we had, that this late in the game, you're right, the House was divided. You know, what was said in the press was not accurate. They had concerns about the Senate's version. They had concerns about the House version. They supported immigration reforms that we read in the newspaper they didn't approve of. And so it was extremely confusing at that late date that we were getting these mixed messages. And so my sense is that you have to look at who would it be threatening to have a national intelligence director that has budgetary authority. And I would say probably it's in the headlines today. You have a Department of Defense who is unwilling, who is not doesn't feel they're responsible to protect us domestically, who holds 80% of the intel budget and doesn't want to give up that budget. He does not want someone else in charge. So my sense is that you probably have a House divided in the administration itself, some that support the legislation moving forward and some that don't. And so I feel that the President should have a conversation directly, not only with the Secretary of Defense, but with Duncan Hunter and Mr. Sensenbrenner and others that are trying to railroad this process. We need to have a safer country, and it's unacceptable that we have a government in place that I hold accountable because they didn't protect my son at work or these other family members on September 11th. It is their moral obligation to put these recommendations into law and to implement them, and to restructure a government that is not only outdated but dysfunctional at this point.
I'll just like to add one thing. As Mary stated, to add on to Mary's statement, stopping short to identify my party affiliation and who I'm going to be voting for in 2 November. As one of the family members stated, we need to stop making this thing a political thing and go ahead and do the right thing. And I do believe the president needs to stop I will not stop campaigning, but this is just as important as his campaign, and I think he needs to step forward and talk face-to-face with these people who are against the Senate version of the bill, and to tell them that they need to push this thing forward and put a bill on his desk by 2 November.
The 5 House Republicans who appear to be sticking with the Pentagon's point of view on the issue of how much to compromise, they're also, of course, up for re-election on Tuesday. What is the over the next week? Are there any plans for either the families or even the commissioners to take some kind of a role in those particular districts, Sensenbrenner, Hyde, and so on? Because, I mean, we all know who these 5 Republicans are. Is there anything planned for that in case at the end of the day it does appear that a bill is not going to get to the president's desk by November 2nd?
Well, I would say that I would hope that a bill is on the desk of the president before the election, that those Republicans are willing to put their special interests and their party affiliations aside and vote for legislation that's going to create real reform. If not, you know, I don't live in their districts, but I would encourage their constituents to be calling their offices and asking for their support. We've tried to act just as the commissioners have in a bipartisan manner. We're not out promoting, you know, one party or another. Many of us are independent and vote for both Republicans and Democrats, and we ask them to put their party affiliations aside too and do what's right in the best interest of our country.
If I may, real quick, we're going to let the record speak for itself, and these 5 House leaders, House Republicans, will tell their constituents how they feel, and we hope their constituents will be listening. And very quickly, Carol is going to read the list just so we make sure we know exactly who we are talking about.
I'm going to read the whole list, and we hope that the people in the United States will call not only the President and Speaker Hastert, but the people who are conferees. We have Peter Hoekstra, Michigan, Duncan Hunter, California, Henry Hyde, Illinois, James Sensenbrenner, Wisconsin, David Dreyer, California, Robert Menendez, New Jersey, Jane Harmon, California, Ike Skelton, Missouri, Susan Collins, Maine, Pat Roberts, Kansas, Trent Lott, Mississippi, George Voinovich, Ohio, Norm Coleman, Minnesota, John Sununu, New Hampshire, Mike DeWine, Ohio, Joe Lieberman, Connecticut, Carl Levin, Michigan, Richard Durbin of Illinois, John Rockefeller, West Virginia, Bob Graham, Florida, and Frank Lautenberg of New Jersey. Also, before you leave, I have a transcript of the Senate Armed Services Committee hearing, which was held August 17th, in which a question was asked of General Myers. The question was, please explain why giving the National Intelligence Director control over intelligence funding causes problems with effective military response to terrorism overseas. And General Myers did respond to that question, and I think you'll find it interesting to read what he had to say.
Thank you very much. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Sure. Pass those out very
Have you heard this?